morning, everybody. And it's Daniel here from the Irish Aviation Students Association, and I'm delighted to have Sean Doyle, the CEO of Aer Lingus, with me today. Thanks, Sean, for joining us on Zoom. So we're just going to start on COVID-19 and just getting your thoughts on how the crisis will affect the industry.
I think we're already seeing it affect the industry. Good morning, Daniel, and thanks for taking some time out to allow me to chat to the student group. Yeah, look, I think we're already seeing it affect the industry in quite dramatic fashion. I've been in aviation since 1998. I lived through 9/11. I was in Singapore when SARS broke, and I also was in British Airways during the 2008 global financial crisis. But I've never seen anything quite like this. It's unprecedented, both in terms of the scale of impact it's having, because it's not just affecting one part of the industry or one market. It's affecting all travel globally and affecting every airline in almost an identical fashion. And secondly, the level of uncertainty about when we begin to come out of this and what the industry looks like, again, is unprecedented. So before we have had demand shocks, but there hasn't been, the sheer cessation of travel to the extent that we have seen in this crisis.
Yeah, exactly. I see that myself working with yourself. So, yeah, that's been quite a big deal. And just on Aer Lingus, so how are Aer Lingus themselves dealing with it, and what are they doing to help out?
Well, I think we're having to manage what has been a very dynamic and fluid situation. So really, for me, I suppose the light bulb moment when this began to impact European aviation was, I remember the evening specifically, the 21st of February, Friday night. We got news that there was clusters emerging in the north of Italy. And I remember actually just talking to my team and saying, this is a bit of a game changer. This is no longer just an issue which is affecting China and Hong Kong and Singapore. This is now becoming a very live issue in our business. And I suppose since that period, from the Monday onwards, we've had a series of rolling effects on the business, be it travel advisories, be it cessation of services, be it reduction in sheer volume of people who want to travel, and a number of new requirements coming in from agencies like IASA to deal with in a very dynamic fashion. And I must say, I'm hugely impressed with the way the organization and the people of Aer Lingus have responded to that. One example would be on the Saturday when the US restrictions were imposed about European travel into US borders. We had a number of volunteers arrived up to Terminal 2 to actually manage all of the questionnaires for passengers who needed to repatriate back to the US. So that was a great example of, I think, Aer Lingus people going above and beyond the call to support the operation in a time of need. I suppose the thing which is most high profile, and again, I think it's something which has been a very, very powerful thing for the organization to galvanize around, was the launch of the Beijing freighter operation to support PPE equipment coming in to the HSC. Now, we set up that operation in the space of about 8 days. It's unprecedented, the speed and scale of the operation that we enacted. There were a number of hurdles to overcome. I suppose the first, most basic one is making sure that you can crew the operation and that you can make the trip with the aircraft that we have. And that was quite easy to establish. Secondly, we then worked through a lot of processes and got a number of approvals from the IAA to be able to optimize the uplift of freight by putting the freight on both the upper deck and the lower deck. So we're able to get up to 22 tons in an A330 flying from Beijing to Dublin. And again, that's something which is quite novel and quite innovative that Aer Lingus has pushed forward with. We had to go through all of the complexities of getting approval to fly. And we may operate over 200 flights to Beijing, and getting the ability to cross various airspaces and to have the rights to secure slots in China was a Herculean effort on behalf of government affairs. We worked very well with our colleagues in British Airways on the ground in China because they have an operation there and they were brilliant in supporting us. Our colleagues in IAG, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Transport, the IAA, and very, very effectively with our colleagues in IALPA and the Safety and Technical Division of IALPA, again, worked brilliantly with flight operations to launch that operation. We had great cooperation in terms of the ground operation. The sort of level of creativity and innovation we brought to kind of handling that volume of freight and loading and unloading the planes in a very novel way, I think shows Aer Lingus at its best. The great thing about what we did in Beijing is that it will make a real difference. You know, when I come in some days, you know, being an airline CEO is tough at the minute, but I put a perspective on it in that I'd rather be an airline CEO than an ICU nurse or an ICU doctor. And I think that to me is sort of things that we need to bear in mind. There are a lot of people on the front line of this crisis who have tougher jobs than we have, but at the same time, there's great things that we can do to support them and to save lives. And I think the PPE freighter operation is a great example of the greater good that Aer Lingus can enable. So for me, that's been the highlight of the last 6 weeks, and I think it's been a huge boost to the organisation in terms of pride and morale.
We all have seen it, and it was on the Late Late Show and everything. So we thank everybody in Aer Lingus for what they've been doing over the last while. And just so we all know that airlines have been hit really, really hard. But with things like fuel prices decreasing, what are the less discussed impacts of COVID-19 on the airline industry, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's two dimensions driving the fuel price. One is the absolute paradigm shift in the economic outlook, because, you know, overall economic demand has taken a shock like we haven't seen since the 30s, people are saying. And that in turn will drive a lower level of demand for oil, and that's driving the price down. You do see the curve rise towards the end of the year, which anticipates some form of recovery. So the fuel price is a little bit of a sort of a forward view of maybe the future economic cycle, where you see it rising above the levels that you can trade at today when you look into 2021 and beyond. There's another dynamic at play as well, which is that there was a glut of capacity in oil markets, and there wasn't agreement amongst the major producers around how they would constrain capacity. It appears as if there is some consensus there, which is going to drive the fuel price back up. So look, I think the reality for a lot of airlines is they don't necessarily participate in the current fuel price drop because they're not flying much. And by the time you do see airlines come back and fly in, whenever that will be, you will see the fuel price will have risen as a result of the better outlook in terms of economic activity. But where it settles at, will probably reflect the new economic reality. And, I would have seen fuel below at these levels before in 2009-10. The problem there is that the demand backdrop and the wider economic environment is pretty challenging, even though the fuel price can be low. Other hidden effects of this, well, look, I think for me, what we have learned a lot about over the last 6 weeks is how to move at pace to get things done in Aer Lingus. And I've been delighted with the sort of level of expertise and teamwork that we've been able to tap into. And I personally feel that in a crisis, you've got to give a lot of trust to your organization and to your people. And we've done that very effectively over the last 6 weeks. And I do feel that I've learned an awful lot about how Aer Lingus works. And we've all learned an awful lot about how we can work well as a team. And I want to take that into the future and make sure that we don't just have, I think, that level of speed and decisiveness and that level of expertise that we can tap into in a crisis only, because I think there's a lot of positives that we can take from the way we're working through this crisis, and we could use that as a building block for the airline in the future.
Brilliant. And then just on the future, so the question that we've been asked a lot, especially by students, is where do we see the future? But it's better to ask you, where do you see the future of aviation?
It's a pretty tough time to kind of give you an accurate answer on that, because there's a huge amount of speculation out there. And I read a lot of reports. I saw one report last night on CNBC, which had an aviation analyst saying she felt that the US industry, would be 30% smaller, and it might take 5 years to get back to being at the level it was at in 2019. So there appears to be a sort of narrative out there that the industry is going to have to retreat and shrink a bit before it gets back to, the levels it was at the peak of the previous cycle. Now, it's funny because, when I looked into the specifics of that report, it said between 2 to 5 years. So, as an analyst, they were being deliberately vague. But there is a general sense out there that, 2019 was probably a strong year, a peak year. 2020 would have been shaping up well before the crisis. but that this is a fundamental reshaping of the industry. It's got to retreat to an extent. You know, strong airlines need to survive this and need to take action immediately to survive it. And then coming out the other end, the expectation is that growth will be slower, and the industry may well be smaller for a period as a result of the scale of recovery that we need to support coming out of this.
Yeah. And then just finally, I know we're all dealing with the same situation and it's tough times for all of us, but have you any advice for people that are in the industry, or students in particular that want to get into the industry, like all of IASA's members? Have you any advice on how to push through and succeed still?
But I think what we got to look around us is sort of, okay, well, out of every crisis there comes, you know, learnings, and you know, necessity drives invention. And I think we learn so much about sort of, you know, what we can do better in the middle of a crisis. And I do think that there's going to be a number of things that can change the industry for the better coming out of this. You know, one, I think we'd have to review, you know, how we make people confident in flying again. And that may require some fundamental changes to all of the ways in which we deliver our product. Two, I think we got to think about ways we can use technology, you know, to maybe have advanced data to kind of create what I would call, you know, clean corridors of travel. And I think technology is going to be a huge enabler there. Three, I think it goes back to kind of, I suppose, you know, what do we stand for? What's our purpose? The fundamental purpose that always sits at the heart of an airline is to, you know, make people feel safe and make people feel confident. And that's never going to be more important than it is at the minute. You know, to kind of almost recommit to those fundamentals of what we offer. That's going to be essential as we come through this. I do think that if you look at the industry, it's a massive industry. It employs lots of people. It's resilient. We've been through crises before. We've come through this again. You know, the way we deliver our service and the way we offer what we have to offer will be different in the future, but it will still exist, because I think humans by nature are adventurous. They want to see the world. They view travel as a fundamental experience. I think I do a lot of business now on Zoom and on video conferencing. It doesn't, for me, match actually meeting face to face. I think if you're in, you know, a detailed process with people, if you're in a creative process or a collaborative process, we will still need people to get together and to build relationships and to get things done. So, you know, it's hard to stay positive at the minute, but we must draw on the positives, and we must look at things that will enable our business to get back on its feet. And that may be a combination of things that we can do in the airline industry, or expertise that we need to draw on from people like IASA, from the WHO, and from various regulatory bodies. But that's what we need to focus on, is how do we get the business back up and running, and how do we, you know, I think reinforce those fundamental promises of being safe and secure when you're flying. You know, again, just kind of, I suppose, redefine what that means for the future, because as you can see, you know, that's challenged at the minute, and it's not just aviation. I think it's challenged in so many other industries as well as a result of the pandemic.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for your time, Sean. And from all of us at IASA, we'd like to wish everybody the best of health during these uncertain times.